When aliens asked for help, humans deployed a fleet of legends. The message came at 0347 hours, ship time. Admiral Kai Voss stood in the command center of Luna Station, coffee growing cold in his hands as he stared at the holographic display. The transmission had taken 3 days to decode, bouncing through 17 different translation matrices before the xenolinguists finally cracked it. "Play it again," Voss muttered. The alien voice filled the room, filtered through synthesizers that made it sound almost human. Almost. "People of Earth, we are the Netheri. We come to you not as conquerors, but as the desperate. Our worlds burn, our children die. The Kethvar consume everything in their path, and we have nowhere left to run." Dr. Zara Okoye, head of xenological studies, adjusted her glasses nervously. "Sir, the mathematical proofs they provided check out. Their star charts are accurate. This isn't a hoax." Voss nodded grimly. The Netheri had included detailed tactical reports, energy signatures, even DNA samples of their fallen soldiers. They were a proud species, tall, graceful beings with translucent skin and 4 arms that moved like liquid mercury. But now, they were broken, scattered across dying colonies, begging for help from a species they'd never met. "What do we know about these Kethvar?" Voss asked. Lieutenant Commander Axel Reyes pulled up a new display. "From what the Netheri have told us, they're a hive species. Think organized like ants, but each individual is the size of a grizzly bear. They don't negotiate, don't take prisoners. They strip planets bare and move on. Numbers? Conservative estimate, 40 billion strong, spread across 200 worlds. They've been expanding for over 3 centuries. The room fell silent. Voss set down his coffee and walked to the viewport, staring out at Earth's blue marble hanging in the void. Humanity had barely colonized their own solar system. They had 12 operational warships, maybe 300,000 trained military personnel across all branches. "Sir?" Dr. Okoye spoke softly. "The Netheri aren't asking us to fight their war. They're asking us to help them survive it. Evacuation protocols, refugee transport, maybe some tactical advisors." But Voss wasn't thinking about evacuation. He was thinking about a conversation he'd had 6 months ago with Captain Dylan Cross, commander of the Deep Space Reconnaissance Fleet. Cross had been drunk, rambling about old soldiers and forgotten wars, when he'd said something that stuck. "Every species in this galaxy fights to win, Admiral. Humans fight to survive, and survival makes you do things winners never would." 3 days later, Voss sat across from the Netheri ambassador, a being called Veltar, whose skin shimmered like oil on water. The alien's 4 hands moved constantly as it spoke, a nervous habit that reminded Voss of his own fingers drumming against his thigh. "Admiral Voss, we understand your limitations," Veltar said through the translator. "We do not ask for your armies. We ask for your wisdom. Your species has survived wars, famines, disasters that would have broken others. Perhaps you can teach us to do the same." Voss leaned back in his chair. "Tell me about the Kethvar's tactics." "They swarm. Overwhelming numbers, coordinated strikes. They take a system in days, strip it clean in weeks." Veltar's hand stilled. "We tried to fight them conventionally. We lost 17 fleets." "What about unconventional warfare?" The alien's large eyes blinked slowly. "I do not understand." "Guerrilla tactics. Hit and run, make them bleed for every inch." Voss stood and began pacing. "You said they're like a hive. Hives have weaknesses. Cut off communication, disrupt supply lines, force them to fight on multiple fronts. Our military doctrine does not include such chaos," Veltar admitted. Voss smiled grimly. "Lucky for you, chaos is humanity's specialty." Within a week, Voss had assembled his team. Not the shiny public faces of the United Earth Defense Force, but the ghosts who operated in the shadows. Captain Dylan Cross and his reconnaissance fleet. Colonel Nix Reardon, whose Black Ops team had never officially existed. Commander Torvik Hale, a logistics genius who could make supply lines appear out of nothing. Major Kira Santos, whose electronic warfare unit could turn enemy computers into scrap metal. They called themselves the Remnant Fleet. 13 ships and 800 personnel who'd volunteered for a mission with no official backing and no guarantee of return. Earth's government had publicly denied any involvement, just as Voss had expected. The journey to Netheri space took 4 months through unstable jump gates. When they finally arrived at the rendezvous point, an asteroid field on the edge of a dying solar system, what they found wasn't an organized military force. It was refugees. Thousands of Netheri ships drifted in the void, most of them civilian transports packed beyond capacity. Captain Cross's voice crackled over the comm. Jesus Christ, Admiral, they're not an army anymore. They're survivors. Veltar met them aboard the largest refugee vessel, a city ship called the Ethereal Dawn that had once housed 1 million Netheri. Now it held barely 300,000, mostly elders and younglings. The ambassador's skin had lost its shimmer, taking on a grayish hue that the xenobiologist said indicated extreme stress. Admiral, I must confess, Veltar began, its four hands trembling. We have deceived you, not intentionally, but we are not the proud military force we once were. We are the last. The Kethvar destroyed our homeworld 3 days ago. The silence in the meeting room was deafening. Major Santos was the first to speak. How many Kethvar ships are pursuing you? Intelligence suggests a fleet of 800 vessels. They will arrive in this system within 72 hours. Colonel Reardon laughed, but there was no humor in it. 800 against 13. I've had worse odds. Commander Hale was already running calculations on his tablet. We can't fight them head on, but we don't have to. We just need to buy time. Time for what? Veltar asked. Voss looked around the room at his officers, battle-scarred veterans who'd signed up for a suicide mission without hesitation. Time to teach the Kethvar why you don't corner a human. The first phase of the plan was simple. Make the Kethvar think they were chasing a much larger force. Santos's electronic warfare team hacked into asteroid mining drones scattered throughout the system, programming them to emit false sensor signatures. Within hours, the asteroid belt looked like it contained a fleet of 300 ships. Meanwhile, Cross's reconnaissance vessels deployed sensor bombs, devices that would detonate in sequence, creating the illusion of massive battles happening across multiple star systems. To Kethvar sensors, it would look like humanity had deployed a vast armada. The real trick was the refugees themselves. Hale worked with Netheri engineers to modify their civilian transports, turning cargo bays into decoy transmitters. Each refugee ship now broadcast the sensor signature of a human battlecruiser. When the Kethvar fleet arrived, they found what appeared to be a fortress system, defended by hundreds of human warships. They did exactly what hive minds do when faced with unexpected resistance. They called for reinforcements. Phase 1 successful, Cross reported from his position deep in the asteroid field. They're pulling back to the edge of the system. Looks like they're waiting for backup. How long do we have? Voss asked. Maybe a week before their reinforcement fleet arrives. Then we're looking at 2,000 ships. Voss nodded. That was exactly what he'd hoped for. The more Kethvar ships they could draw into this system, the fewer would be hunting Netheri refugees elsewhere. Phase 2 began immediately. Reardon's Black Ops team, working with Netheri volunteers, began infiltrating Kethvar communication networks. The hive species used biological quantum entanglement for instantaneous communication across vast distances, a technology humanity couldn't replicate but could definitely sabotage. Think of it like a nervous system, Dr. Okoye explained during a strategy briefing. Cut the right nerves, and you can paralyze entire sections of the hive. The infiltration took 3 days. Reardon's team used Netheri biomimicry technology to create synthetic Kethvar pheromones, allowing them to approach hive communication nodes without triggering alarm responses. Once inside, they planted quantum viruses designed to disrupt coordination protocols. The effect was immediate and devastating. Kethvar fleets across 3 star systems suddenly found themselves operating independently. Their perfect coordination shattered. Ships collided during formation changes. Supply convoys got lost. Attack formations broke apart mid-assault. But the Kethvar weren't stupid. Within hours, they'd identified the source of the disruption and began hunting for the infiltrators. Reardon's team had to fight their way out of 6 different hive nodes, leaving behind a trail of dead Kethvar and destroyed equipment. Colonel, you need to pull back, Voss ordered over the comm. They're adapting too quickly. Negative, Admiral. Reardon's voice crackled with static. We've got one more target, the primary coordination hub for this sector. If we can take it out, their entire fleet will be flying blind. The assault on the coordination hub was a masterpiece of controlled chaos. While Reardon's commandos attacked from the inside, Cross's ships provided covering fire from the asteroid belt. Santos's electronic warfare unit jammed Kethvar communications, and Hale coordinated supply drops to keep the assault team equipped. The hub was destroyed, taking with it the Kethvar's ability to coordinate fleet movements across a dozen star systems. But the victory came at a cost. Reardon's team was trapped inside the collapsing structure, surrounded by thousands of angry Kethvar soldiers. Admiral, Reardon's final transmission was calm, professional. Tell Earth, tell them, we did our job. The explosion that destroyed the coordination hub lit up the entire system. When the light faded, there was nothing left but debris and silence. Voss stood alone on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the tactical display. His best ground commander was dead, along with 30 of the finest soldiers humanity had ever produced. But their sacrifice had bought something precious: time and chaos. The Kethvar reinforcement fleet arrived to find their advance forces in complete disarray. Ships drifted aimlessly, their coordination protocols still corrupted. Some were firing on their own vessels, unable to distinguish friend from foe through the quantum static. Phase 3, Voss announced to his remaining commanders. Let's show them what human ingenuity really looks like. The final phase was the most audacious yet. Using modified Netheri stealth technology, Cross's reconnaissance ships began moving through the Kethvar fleet, tagging individual vessels with quantum beacons. To outside sensors, it looked like the tagged ships were broadcasting human identification codes. The psychological effect was immediate. The already confused Kethvar fleet began turning on itself, each group convinced that the others had been compromised by human infiltrators. Panic spread through the hive mind like wildfire. Meanwhile, Hale's logistics team worked with Netheri engineers to construct something unprecedented. A gravity well generator powered by controlled fusion reactions. The device wouldn't destroy the Kethvar fleet, but it would trap them in the system long enough for word to spread throughout the galaxy about the humiliating defeat. When the gravity well activated, 2,000 Kethvar ships found themselves unable to jump to hyperspace. They were stuck, confused, turning on each other in a frenzy of misdirected aggression. Admiral, Santos reported, barely able to contain her excitement. We're picking up transmissions from across Kethvar space. They're recalling fleets from active campaigns. It looks like they're going into full defensive mode. Voss allowed himself a small smile. The Kethvar had spent centuries expanding unopposed, consuming everything in their path. Now, for the first time, they were afraid. They'd encountered something they couldn't understand, couldn't predict, couldn't assimilate. They'd encountered humanity. The evacuation of the Netheri refugees began immediately. While the Kethvar fleet remained trapped and confused, human and Netheri ships worked together to transport survivors to safe sectors. Veltar's people were scattered across a dozen neutral worlds, but they were alive. As the last refugee transport prepared to jump to safety, Veltar approached Voss one final time. The ambassador's skin had regained some of its shimmer, though it was still tinged with grief. Admiral, I must ask, why? Why did your people risk everything for strangers? Your government disavowed this mission. Your officers knew they might never return home, yet you came anyway. Voss was quiet for a long moment, watching through the viewport as Cross's ships began their own evacuation. 7 of his 13 vessels had been lost or too damaged to make the journey home. Almost half his crew wouldn't be returning to Earth. Because, he said finally, that's what humans do. We see someone who needs help, and we help. Even when it's stupid. Even when it's hopeless. Especially then. Veltar's 4 hands moved in what the xenobiologists had identified as a gesture of deep respect. The galaxy will remember what happened here, Admiral. The story of how 13 human ships defeated a hive fleet will spread to every world, every species. You have given us more than survival. You have given us hope. The journey back to Earth took 6 months. When Voss finally stood in the debriefing room at Luna Station, facing a panel of generals and politicians, the questions came like artillery fire. Admiral, do you understand the diplomatic crisis you've created? The Kethvar are threatening to invade human space in retaliation. Did you consider the risk to Earth's security before launching this unauthorized mission? How do you justify the loss of 7 ships and 400 personnel on a mission with no strategic value to humanity? Voss listened to it all in silence, his hands clasped behind his back. When they finally ran out of accusations, he spoke quietly. Sirs, with respect, you're asking the wrong questions. General Morrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, leaned forward angrily. Then, what's the right question, Admiral? The right question is, what happens next time? Voss stepped closer to the panel. Because there will be a next time. Another species will come to us for help. Another impossible situation will land on our doorstep. And when that happens, what kind of people do we want to be? The room fell silent. Through the viewport, Earth hung like a blue jewel against the stars, peaceful and beautiful and completely unaware of the war that had been fought in its name. The Kethvar aren't threatening to invade human space, Voss continued. They're too busy dealing with the 15 other species that have suddenly started using our tactics against them. Asymmetrical warfare, psychological operations, coordinated resistance movements. The galaxy is learning, gentlemen, learning that predators can be prey if you know how to hunt them. Dr. Okoye, who had been quietly reviewing intelligence reports throughout the hearing, finally spoke up. Admiral, we've been monitoring communications from across known space. Do you know what they're calling us now? Voss shook his head. The Ghost Fleet. Legends tell of 13 human ships that appeared from nowhere, destroyed a hive armada, and vanished like smoke. Half the species in this quadrant are requesting military advisors. The other half are begging us not to consider them enemies. General Morrison rubbed his temples, suddenly looking very old. What have you done, Voss? I've reminded the galaxy that humans don't follow the rules, Voss replied. We make our own. The hearing ended without resolution. Officially, the Remnant Fleet mission never happened. The personnel records were classified. The ship losses attributed to training accidents, the entire operation buried under layers of bureaucratic denial. But in the bars where veterans gathered, in the academies where young officers learned their trade, in the deep space stations where explorers prepared for the unknown, the story spread. The legend grew. Captain Dylan Cross, one of only 6 officers to return from the mission, retired quietly to a small farm on Mars. But sometimes, late at night, he would look up at the stars and remember what it felt like to turn an entire hive fleet against itself with nothing but human audacity and alien refugees. Colonel Nix Reardon's name was carved into the memorial wall at the Special Operations Academy, along with the 30 soldiers who died with her. The inscription read simply, "They taught the galaxy to fear the dark." Commander Torvik Hale revolutionized military logistics, developing new theories about resource allocation in impossible scenarios. His most famous lecture, Making Something from Nothing, became required reading at every military academy in human space. Major Kira Santos founded the Electronic Warfare Research Institute, dedicated to developing countermeasures against hostile alien technologies. Her first publication was titled, How to Break a Hive Mind in 3 Easy Steps. And Admiral Kai Voss? He disappeared one night, along with his personal shuttle and enough supplies for a long journey. Some said he'd been court-martialed in secret. Others claimed he'd been given a new mission, one so classified that it couldn't officially exist. But the veterans knew better. They knew he was out there somewhere, in the dark between the stars, waiting for the next desperate message from a species with nowhere else to turn. Because that's what humans do. They help, even when it's stupid, even when it's hopeless. Especially then. 5 years later, when the Vrex Confederacy faced extinction at the hands of the Crystalline Shapers, they sent a message to Earth. Not through official diplomatic channels, but through the shadowy networks where ghost stories and legends were traded like currency. The message was simple. We know about the 13 ships. We know about the Ghost Fleet. Please, we have nowhere else to turn. The response came 3 days later, broadcast on a frequency that didn't officially exist, in a voice that belonged to a man who had never officially left Earth. Pack light and move fast. The legends are coming. In the Outer Rim territories, where civilization was just a rumor and hope was a luxury few could afford, children learned a new bedtime story. It spoke of a fleet that appeared when all seemed lost, of humans who fought impossible odds and won through sheer bloody-minded refusal to quit. The story always ended the same way. And when the monsters come for you, when the darkness closes in and there's nowhere left to run, remember the Ghost Fleet. Remember that somewhere in the black, 13 ships are waiting to remind the galaxy what legends look like. The universe was vast and dark and full of horrors that defied comprehension. But it was also full of humans, scattered like sparks across the void, carrying with them an unshakable belief that nobody should have to face the dark alone. And in the deepest reaches of space, where even starlight struggled to penetrate the gloom, Admiral Kai Voss stood on the bridge of a ship that didn't exist, surrounded by crew members who had never officially lived, preparing for a war that would never be recorded in the history books. "Coordinates plotted, Admiral," Cross reported from the navigation station, his face unmarked by time but carved with memories of impossible victories. "All systems green," Santos added from her position at the electronic warfare console, fingers dancing across controls that had been modified with technology from a dozen different species. "Supply line secured," Hale confirmed, his logistics network now spanning half the galaxy, invisible and untraceable. And from her position at the tactical station, a woman who looked remarkably like Colonel Nix Reardon smiled with anticipation. "Ready to raise some hell, sir." Voss nodded, watching the stars stream past the viewport as they jumped to hyperspace, racing toward another impossible mission, another desperate species, another chance to prove that legends weren't born from victory. They were forged from the decision to fight when fighting was hopeless, to stand when standing was suicide, to light a candle in the darkness even when the darkness seemed infinite. "Take us in," he ordered. "Time to remind the galaxy what happens when you corner a human." In the vast darkness of space, 13 ships that didn't exist prepared to do the impossible once again. Not for glory, not for recognition, not for any reward beyond the simple knowledge that somewhere in the universe, people who had nowhere else to turn were about to discover they weren't alone. Because that's what humans do. And legends. Legends never die.